Warning: the following podcast contains graphic content that may be disturbing or triggering to some listeners. Discretion is advised. The Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast is available free of charge thanks to the support of Cracked Armor.
Their mission is to raise awareness for PTSD, TBI, and mental health to support those who struggle. By creating an army of warriors who represent the gear, their hope is that it will send a message to others that they are not alone.
Go to crackedarmor.com, say hi to Mark Long, read about the story, and find some research information about PTSD. And if you can, look good while supporting Cracked Armor by buying some gear.
(10-9). Did you say Papa Tango Sierra Delta? 10-4.
There's so much left to do, so many things I wanna say, and I say, don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it all away.
This is episode 19 of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. My name is Larry Payton, and I have been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress. Quick shout-outs to listeners in Northern Ireland, Prescott, Arizona, and Winnipeg, Manitoba. Speaking of Winnipeg, very excited to announce that I have been invited to attend the 2023 World Police and Fire Games, which are happening in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I will be there from July 26th until August 2nd to do some live shows, some recordings, and speak to athletes throughout the games about mental health, post-traumatic stress, and traumatic brain injuries. I appreciate the messages people sent checking in on me and my family with regards to the wildfires that occurred in Tantallon and Hammonds Plains, Nova Scotia. Thankfully, those fires are now under control. We did not have to evacuate from my place, but it did come close enough that we were prepared and expecting to go. I had to do some thinking about the entire week because I struggled. One of the realizations I came to was once I retire from the RCMP, I am going to join the volunteer fire department. Now hold on, wait a second. That was what I said to my wife. She didn't agree. And in fairness, it would not be a good idea for me considering the struggles I'm already having. But it really sucked for me to be on the sidelines of such a huge emergency. I just wanted to be out there and to help fight the fires, to have the 6 of my brothers and sisters out there, to be able to protect, to just work my ass off and do what I do. So as I thought about that, I immediately thought, I'm going to join the volunteer fire department later in life. When I had that conversation with my wife, she was able to put things together pretty quickly. Her response was, you've done your job, you've helped people, it's time to take a break. And furthermore, your issue is that you're waiting to be rescued, but you're typically the rescuer. Fuck, that's true. That was a struggle for me. Just sitting here, anxious, waiting, checking the winds, checking the smoke, checking the fire, constantly looking for updates. Then we had pop-up fires that were happening all around us. One in Waverly, one in Fall River, just behind my house. Now I'm thinking, Jesus, there's more going on. I need to do something. I have to be part of this. I have to get out and help. It is a very uncomfortable position to be the rescuer who has to sit there and do nothing but wait for other rescuers to come. That's odd. I'm not used to that. But that right now is my reality. And it's something that I know I need to work on accepting. And in the future, whenever I do retire, yeah, I'm going to have to work on that full time. Trying to remember that I'm not the one that's supposed to be running into danger anymore. Then there was the issue of the dead bird. Yeah, totally different, just change the topic. But it also speaks volumes about my activation / triggers. So we have a screen room set up outside over a hot tub. There's a lot of rain, and the roof was collapsed in on the side. So I held one part and pulled it towards me. But instead of water, a dead bird came out at my feet. Now, it wasn't a cute little bird that just passed away peacefully. This bird was ravaged. Its eyes were out, its throat was exposed. The guts of it were all down the side of the screen room. I just stood there and looked at it. Turned around, walked back towards the house to go get something to clean it up. That's when my wife came out the door. I told her to go back in the house because there wouldn't be a hot tub today on account of the dead bird. She thought I was full of shit, and so she came out and wanted to see it. When I walked her over and showed her, all of a sudden, I began dry heaving. It was a bird, but I started dry heaving. And I didn't understand what the hell was going on with me. I told her I would clean it up in amongst my dry heaves. She said she would. She went in the house, grabbed a bag, and came back out. I told her again that I would take care of it. This is what I'm supposed to do. She told me, no, this is not. Sit back, relax. She has this. So I walked beside her, and when I saw the bird again, I started dry heaving. Then, when she bent down, put her hand in the bag, and picked up the bird, my dry heaves became violent. I don't know what the hell was wrong with me. There's a bird. I mean, it was in rough shape. It had been destroyed by other birds or whatever fucking did it, but it's a bird. I don't understand. Well, during my session this week with my psychologist, we discussed that. It's interesting her thoughts on it, which I can't help but agree. When the bird first came at my feet, I was alone. No one was there. To me, it was evident that it was my responsibility to deal with it, and I didn't have a problem with it. I went back into my somewhat stoic way when I would attend fatal motor vehicle collisions. The psychologist asked me, did you dry heave when you were at some of the worst ones? I said, no, never. She said, do you think that's probably because you knew you were there to deal with it and you would just deal with it? I said, I guess. I don't really understand. I mean, it just didn't bother me. I don't understand how the bird bothered me. My psychologist continued by saying, things changed for me when my wife came out and walked towards the bird, because in my brain, I subconsciously realized that I did not have to deal with that, which allowed my reaction to be nausea and dry heaving. Wow. Essentially, in my head, I was back to some horrible scenes, and this time I was allowed to react the way that was more natural. Things got a little bit heavier when she grabbed the bird, as I mentioned. That was when I really violently, deeply started, well, like I was going to vomit. Once my psychologist had stated that I dry heaved the first time because I did not have to deal with that, I realized the reason things became so violent to me when she grabbed the bird. It put me back in situations where, off the highway, I had to pick up pieces of a person that were like a steak. Just a piece of meat. Yeah, I'm definitely changing. I'm not really sure if it's for the better. I mean, I say that with a smile on my face because I know it's for the better. I know that I'm finally acting normally to an abnormal situation, as opposed to my prior fucked up way to deal with everything. But it's new for me. It feels different for me. It feels like I'm not in the control I was before. However, the truth is, I'm more in control now than I ever was before. Let's take a quick break.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the podcast. If you have experience with post-traumatic stress and would like to join me for an episode, please reach out to me. You can contact me via direct message on Instagram, PTSD_podcast, or you can send me an email at Papa Tango Sierra Delta Podcast @gmail.com. Cheers.
This episode of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast is brought to you thanks to the support and financial sponsorship of Cracked Armor. Go to crackedarmor.com, read the story, buy the gear, wear it, to send a message to others who are struggling that they're not alone.
Also, check out Willow Tree Farm, care of Jason Subkowicz, another member who is struggling with PTSD and who frequently updates his Instagram to share his story. You can follow him at jason.subkowicz. That's jason.Sierra Oscar Bravo Kilo Oscar Whiskey India Charlie Zulu.
We are back from the break. Thank you very much for staying tuned in to the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. Today we have Scott McPherson, who is retired Army, currently a firefighter and a paramedic. And we also have a former law enforcement officer, Andrea Rider. Guys, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Andrea, we're going to start off with you. If you could please introduce yourself, tell us about your journey.
I was a former police officer in the U.S., and I was in law enforcement for just under 10 years. Of course, dealt with a variety of things, but there was one major on-duty, traumatic incident is kind of what caused my journey for healing and the journey that currently on here talking to you. After encountering that incident, I found a lack of follow-up and resources from my department for, kind of healing through that and processing that incident. That left me to find my own resources that were first responder specific. It took me about 6 months before I found somebody on my own that I could talk to that was first responder specific. And that made all the difference in the world. In that time, that traumatic incident was left unprocessed for that time. My brain wanted to process it, but just didn't know how to. So in that time, that struggle that I had felt, once I had gone through the introductory to the healing of that, I vowed that I didn't want anybody else to feel that struggle. So my motto came to be of nobody else gets left behind on my watch. So I vowed to do anything I could to help that struggle. Upon that, then I left the police department on my own. And once I moved, I was looking for a way to help first responders. Once I found that there wasn't really any resources in my area, I kept looking, and I stumbled upon a program called REBOOT Recovery, and it is a peer-led program, and that's where I became involved with this to be able to help other first responders on the healing journey. So hopefully they don't have to go through feeling left alone like I felt.
Pretty much everything you said just resonated with me for a number of reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into today. Yes, I completely understand where you're coming from. And there is certainly a major lack of resources or a lack of an ability maybe to properly identify the issues. It's sort of that mentality of, you're a cop, you kind of push forward, right? You make sure you get home at the end of the shift. If anyone's getting home, you're getting home. Get out there, combat breathing, just always push on, always. And so that's into our mentality so much that it becomes difficult, I feel, even for peers and superiors to see any withdrawal from that, because I too feel that they're dealing with the same issues. They just haven't come to terms with it. But we'll get back more into that, Andrea. Thank you very much for introducing yourself and for leading us into Reboot. We're going to bring Scott in to tell us about his background, his journey, and lead us into Reboot Recovery.
All right, Larry, before I start, I just wanted to say thank you for doing this podcast. In our courses, we talk a lot about finding ways to turn pain into purpose. And it really feels like that's exactly what you've done, and being able to connect with first responders all over North America and help them in their healing journey, and just to let them know that they're not alone. And so
thanks, buddy. I appreciate that.
Thank you for doing
Thank you, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you for having us on.
Absolutely.
So a little bit about myself. I guess my journey started in the Army, U.S. Army. I was enlisted and then went back to school, went back in as an infantry officer, served in combat in the 82nd Airborne Division, Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm. During that time, incurred a back injury, kept on going for a while, but eventually throwing a ruck on your back and walking all day was just not going to happen. So ended up leaving the military, going back into the civilian world, but always had a heart for those who serve. And so when the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts were at their peak intensity, came across this program that was focused on helping combat veterans and their spouses with a return home from war and combat trauma, the post-traumatic stress injuries associated with their combat experiences. And I got really involved with that, leading courses around where I was living in Middle Tennessee. And I found a guy who was up at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, who was doing something very similar, and decided to come alongside him and his wife. They were just having all sorts of inroads and making connections. So I joined alongside of them as part of their leadership team, got to see REBOOT in its beginning stages and as it really took off. What we found is there was just a real niche that we were hitting here that nobody else was really touching on at the time. And that's the combination of the standard kind of things that people think about with post-traumatic stress injuries and this whole concept of a soul wound. And being able to address both of those was what made REBOOT really special in that combat trauma arena, and why people kept on reaching out and saying, yeah, we need this too. So I did that for a number of years, and then was also a firefighter EMT for a department just outside of Nashville, and began to realize there was a whole community of people out there that it's not the same as combat experiences, but these were people making life and death decisions with incomplete information in little time frame to be able to react. Sometimes those things don't work out the way that you wanted them to. And, also it's that brotherhood and that sisterhood where you're putting your life in somebody else's hands and they're putting their life into yours. And there was just this realization that we had that they need this too. So we translated our materials from a military and a combat veteran perspective and language and culture into that of the first responder world. So that rolled out our first responder specific course in 2019. That's when Andrea and I got connected. And so far we've led 7 courses, so 7 groups of first responders through the service-related trauma recovery course.
Wow.
Been able to connect with responders. This was during COVID, so we got to connect with responders all over the country and just got to see the incredible difference it made in their journeys and their healing. And what was really cool was we saw so many people say, we're going to start a course in our locale, wherever they were in the country. They were going to start a course there. And so it's what makes us so passionate about this, is that we've gotten to see life change. We've gotten to see people come in who are kind of feeling hopeless, like they tried everything and nothing was working. And 12 weeks later, when the course is done, they're just on a whole different trajectory. It's not that anything's healed. I mean, there's still a long journey ahead of them, but they got direction, they've got purpose, and many of them headed into some kind of a leadership capacity. So that's just a little bit about me.
It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Andrea, I've got the lines open for both of you now, just to let you know for anything you want to say. But Andrea, did you go through the program at all, or did you start up with helping with it from the initial 2019, I guess, when Scott said?
No, I actually did not go through the program. I just initially jumped in as a co-leader because I was looking and searching in the area for something that I could actively be involved with first responders. And I happened to just stumble upon it. And I can't even remember how I stumbled upon it, but they hadn't established a course in this area yet, but we're looking to. And so it just happened to be timing that I called them and said, hey, what does it look like for this area? I noticed you didn't have any courses currently listed. They're like, well, good timing. So basically it just came at the right time. The ball was starting to roll, and then kind of bada bing, bada boom. And I actually started with another couple leading before I had met Scott. So I had led 4 courses with that other couple who was a law enforcement husband and his wife. And then that's what kind of got it started. So we were the first in this area. And then I met Scott through that. So Scott had reached out to us, and now I do it with Scott too.
Okay, so we hear REBOOT come up. Obviously, that's what we want to talk about today. But a lot of people, certainly on this side of the border, are going to go, whoa, hold on a second. What exactly is REBOOT? Scott, if you could please introduce people to the program. I was taken aback. I learned about this when I was in Kentucky and happened to be speaking about my diagnosis with John from Glens Creek Distilling. And then all of a sudden, he just comes in and puts your name on a card and says, you need to speak to this guy. And that's what led us here. So as soon as I start doing some kind of geeking out on REBOOT Recovery, wow,
very, impressed. To me, it's got a beautiful foundation, and especially how you things have differentiations between families, combat veterans, and first responders. So if you could please tell us all about REBOOT.
Yeah, glad to. So, REBOOT was first founded in 2011, and again, had that kind of military DNA. That's where we started. But in the first responder world, it's a 12-week course. So we have some courses that are run in person where people are gathering together. Others are done virtually, just so we can connect with people that aren't near a place they can go to one of the courses. And so each week we take on a separate topic, which is specific to first responder trauma from a couple of different perspectives. One is the science of trauma recovery. And then also, because we've identified this issue of the soul wound that is often so real that for many people that we've incorporated a faith-based element. So it's a non-denominational based on scripture, where we're integrating scripture when it talks about some of the things that are so specific to what first responders have experienced. So to give you an example, we have a whole week where we talk about processing grief and loss. All of us think that we're supermen and superwomen, and we go out and see these things on a shift, and then we come home, and we come back to the station, we come back home, and it's like, it was no big deal. It didn't affect me. Well, we're all human, and it does. So we've all experienced loss in this profession. So we've got to be able to have a way to be able to process that loss in a healthy way. So we take a whole week to talk just about that. We've got a whole nother week on identity. Many of us will base our identity on the uniform that we wear or the badge that we wear. But, what happens when you take that off? Who are you? We talk about that. We talk about forgiveness, both forgiveness of others who have harmed us, but also forgiveness of ourselves, where we haven't measured up to what we thought ought to be some of our expectations. We talk about what trauma does to the mind, the body, and the soul, and also how we go about healing the mind and the soul. And so that's just to kind of introduce the next weeks. And we have a whole week, as I said before, on finding purpose in pain. We live in a world where pain is part of, we're every time the tones drop, every time we're called, it's quite likely we're entering into the worst part of somebody else's life. And so we see a lot of pain and we experience it ourselves. It affects us. So how do you turn that into something that's purposeful? Those are just some examples of topics that we take on. So once a week, we usually share a meal together, if meeting in person, just to build community. And then we'll go into a time of talking about that specific topic for the week, usually a little bit of homework that just is a follow-on to see how you apply it in your own personal context. And then we continue on each week for a 12-week program. As I said, spouses are invited. And I think that's a very powerful opportunity for first responders and spouses to talk about some of the things that have happened. And we usually don't want to take home with us the ugliness of some of the things that we've seen. So, we'll say, we'll just kind of act like, I got it. It's no big deal. But the spouse knows there's something going on. So this offers them a context to be able to understand and talk with each other about some of these things, just to understand each other better. And then once the course is over, we've got kind of a next steps, where some people will realize they didn't catch everything they wanted to. They'll do the whole course again. We've got another program that we call REBOOT Advanced, where it's kind of a deeper dive into the topics people can do. Many people will elect to go into leadership, and we've got a whole leadership training program where we can take somebody who's just got a passion for those who serve and want to implement this in their community or with their agency, and we'll train them, equip them, coach them on everything they would need to lead themselves.
Okay, so phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I loved the identity issue, because that to me is a huge reason that the life expectancy of first responders, especially police officers, is so low post-retirement, because I truly believe members have no concept whatsoever of who they are anymore, because you become so encompassed in the job. The job becomes your life. And so, for me, I'm a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and a lot of people will be, okay, so who are you? And so many members need to say immediately, this is what I do for a living, because their identity is built upon that very foundation.
Just to add on that, when you go to a social gathering, how do people introduce you? That's so-and-so, he's a police officer, or, vice versa. So it's so common for first responders too. I mean, how can you not get wrapped up in that sometimes when that's how others identify you as well?
You hit the nail on the head. And, this disheartening day comes where, I don't know, to me, it's a subconscious, it's going to continue on without you, but there's something kind of flickered in the back of your head that's like, I'm not really sure if they're going to be able to keep this unit going, that I'm not there. And it takes a very short amount of time to realize that everything moves on without you, that all the teammates that you had spoken with and hung out with for 12-hour shifts for years on end, you rarely hear from anymore. You no longer are a police officer, so you've lost your identity. And most have gone through a divorce or multiple divorces. So a lot of members are left there wondering, I've lost everything. Who am I? I'm no one. When you start mixing that with post-traumatic stress, I think that's what starts bringing them down the rabbit hole where they're making some very poor decisions and eventually considering extinguishing their own light. I think it's fantastic, Scott, that you guys do that, because that's a huge problem. And I think it's one that's rarely touched on, oddly enough, because I think so much focus is on the post-traumatic stress as opposed to the realities of things that may very well be upcoming that they have not yet conceived of.
Well, we get so focused on that because I don't think that we've been taught to think on what all the qualities you have, what makes you up. That being a first responder, yes, it is a big part of your identity because it takes so much of you to do the job. It's just not a normal job. You need all that extra training, and it takes a special person to be in certain shoes to fill that responsibility. So yes, it does come with great responsibility. And I think that what puts the emphasis on having your identity as your uniform, your badge. But, you weren't a first responder come birth. You were somebody else before that. You were somebody else, in high school, college, or, post on. So I think it's so easy to let all that go because it takes so much to be a first responder that everything else goes to the wayside. And we're not informed or trained mental-wise to keep those things at our foremost, because when you have to work overtime, what goes to the side? Your actual job as being a parent or a spouse, those obligations get pushed to the side. So I think because of the first responder identity taking over some of your personal life so much, that's how people get wrapped up in that. And they forget that they are a parent, a brother, a sister, or even a son, daughter, that sort of thing.
I completely agree. And I think to build onto that, Andrea, it's why as well we fail to process the traumas that we've experienced, because we go through a trauma and then we go home and we have to be, a dad or a mom or a wife or a husband, a sister, brother, whatever. And there just really isn't downtime to process it. So we just keep saying, we're good. We got this. We're good. And it obviously doesn't work that way. Scott, from your side of things, here we have someone who's a military veteran and now is in firefighting and EMT. I mean, what do you see in terms of the correlations, in terms of that identity issue, and in terms of the trauma to which you're exposed?
Yeah, it's very similar. Both in the identity, you join because you want to be part of something bigger than yourself. And at some point, that's going to end. You're going to take off the uniform. You're going to walk out a civilian. And now you're just like everybody else. And that probably happens for most people in a sooner time frame than it would as a first responder who may have, 15, 20, 30-year career to really build up that identity. But it comes from the same place. You joined because you wanted to serve your community. You wanted to be part of something bigger than yourself. So there's a lot of parallels on that. I think in terms of the stress injuries that are experienced, I would say that there's a higher propensity to more kind of compassion fatigue and burnout in the first responder world, whereas there may be more propensity toward kind of the critical incident stress in the first responder world. I mean, not to say that there's a lot in both, but if you had to kind of say where are some differences, that would be one that I might be able to identify. But, there's just so many parallels, the whole different language, whole different culture, even between different first responder services, but there's so many parallels with what combat veterans experience. And I think that's why in many cases, the only person that a first responder is really willing to talk to is somebody who's been downrange.
Absolutely. Yeah, would you agree with that, Andrea?
Oh, definitely. And that's why I mentioned that it took me a while to find somebody who was first responder specific as a resource to help me. And luckily, she was former police officer as well. And it just, of course, you get that instant trust, but there was so much that I didn't have to say because she knew, because she had been in those shoes. So that definitely is a big part.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I seem to say of late as well, over the past couple of years since my diagnosis, that I seem to be able to talk better with people who are like me as opposed to people who aren't. And I think primarily there is that trust, but it's also the realization that I don't feel like I need to explain a lot of things in terms of what I'm feeling right now, what I'm going through. If there's too much noise, I'm becoming hyper aroused. I'm hyper vigilant. I'm looking around. And again, it's just that comfort level that the person across from me gets it. And I find that very refreshing.
Hey, Larry, before we move on, I want to say one more thing about identity, and that's concerning this word disorder when it comes to, and I know that's the clinical term, post-traumatic stress disorder. But sometimes I've found that when people get that diagnosis, that becomes part of their identity as well. That's why you won't hear me use that term when we're leading our courses. I always talk about post-traumatic stress injuries because I can actually illustrate for somebody how what they're experiencing is a wound of the mind. It's a actual changes in the brain physiology and brain chemistry that leads to the symptomology that people experience who are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress injuries. And just like any other injury, those injuries can heal. And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily, it's not going to be that they're, everything is like it was before the incident or before service. But there is that possibility for injuries to heal, just as if, you broke your leg. If you did nothing about it, then it may heal kind of somewhat, but it's probably not going to be in great shape. If you take deliberate steps to heal in the way that God intended our body to heal, then what you find is that you can actually experience post-traumatic growth. And that's really where we shoot for in our courses. We're not just trying to have people kind of out of a disorder. We're looking for them to be on a whole new trajectory of life, building on those experiences, having them a pain point. There's no taking away the pain that they've experienced, but launching them into a whole new purpose in life that strengthens their relationships, it strengthens them personally, it gives them a whole new value to life, a whole new sense of where life is headed. And that's a cool thing when you see that. So while we were talking about identity, I just thought I would throw that out there as well.
We're going to need to hit more on the heal because that's a word that is very rarely used when we start talking about post-traumatic stress. Is there being a heal to it? And I love the concept of post-traumatic growth because, again, it almost seems like a life sentence for most people. It did for me for a long time. So how is it that REBOOT works people through the healing process, and what does healed feel like? What does it mean?
Great question, Larry. Where I think I would start answering that question is that each one of us has a default response to trauma, whether it's a bad car wreck, whether it's looking down the sights of a rifle or a pistol and pulling a trigger and ending another life, whether it's getting called out to a suicide of a teenager. There's just so many things. But we all have a default response to that. If we're not intentional, we tend to fall into. And the first one you already mentioned, it's deny. That's the typical, you come back from that call, you get cleaned up, everybody go, hey, you doing okay? Yeah, I'm good. That's what you say, right? And then you go home and your spouse say, how was your shift? And you go, I'm good. And you don't want to talk about it. And you want to just kind of act like it never happened and hope it'll just kind of go away on its own. Really what we're doing there is we're just packing things in a box. We're trying to put all these things that we've seen and we've smelled, and we try and pack them in a box in the back of our mind somewhere and just hope it'll all go away. Well, the fact of the matter is the box continues to accumulate with these things. And at some point it breaks open or it starts to leak into some area of our life. And then it moves into the next phase. When that box busts open, that's where we move into what we call cry. Now, it can be that we're actually weeping, but in many cases, what it is, it's just like the emotional overload. All those things that we've seen and done that we haven't processed, that we tried to shove in the box and put in the back of the closet somewhere, all come busting open, and it's this rush of emotion that's scary and it feels overwhelming. That's what we call the cry phase of things. And that, because it feels like it's so unmanageable and uncontrollable, we try to do what we know to do to control that situation. And that's where we do the next thing, which is numb. So we're going to find all sorts of ways to try to numb the pain, whether that's overwork, whether that's working out all day long as much as we can, whether it's playing video games all day, whether it's alcohol, whether it's prescription drugs, whether it's whatever we can do to numb the pain and not feel it, we're going to move to it. What we can do ourselves. And then when that doesn't work, because ultimately all of those things lead to something else going wrong in life. When that doesn't work, that's where we run. That's the fourth one. And run can be a lot of things. We can run from relationships. We can run from our friends. We can run from the department. We can run from all the things that we enjoy in life. And ultimately, the final and most tragic phase of running is suicide. And so, I think if you really tracked it through, you'll see a lot of people go through that kind of default response to trauma. So in Reboot, what we're trying to do is equip people with another way. And that's where we give them opportunities to dig deep into these subjects. I outlined several of them, but there's 12 of them, where they can really look at this topic on a deeper level, see how it applies into their own life and the lives of the people that are around them, and then be able to tell their story. So, we're getting together in a community of people that I wasn't on the same scene you were, but I've seen stuff, you've seen stuff. We haven't seen the same stuff, but we get each other and we can kind of go, yeah, whatever he's saying, I get it. That's where it's a community of like-minded people who can support each other through digging into those hard things of the past and being able to talk about them. And, if you look at the majority of approaches to post-traumatic stress injuries, they involve the brain being able to process what's been experienced. And so that's one of the primary ways that we give people a chance to process what they've been through is by telling their story, just telling elements of it. And then at 1 week is a full week where they get an opportunity to tell their story to the group in as much detail as they might want to do. And for many, it's the first time they've ever done it. First time they've ever told anybody the things that they've seen, the things that they've been through. That's where a lot of that healing comes in, is having an opportunity to be in community with other people who get it and being able to be raw and honest and open and just kind of unpack the box in whatever way that somebody might need to, so that they come out at a place where they've processed a lot of the experiences. Not all of it. It's not like all the symptoms go away. We're not trying to lead anybody down a primrose path here, but the box is oftentimes kind of over full. And that's where we need to be able to take the time to help the brain process what it's experienced. We oftentimes talk about the two hemispheres of the brain. You've got one on the left that's more focused on chronology and kind of what happened when. You got another on the right that's more kind of spatial and emotional. And the two of them really don't connect all that well. So when a traumatic incident happens, or there's just a whole lot of emotional content, we're focused on survival. We're focused on accomplishing the mission, doing what we need to do. We get done with that scene, though, and now the brain is trying to kind of reconcile the emotions of what was happening with the events. And there's so much content in there that it's kind of like trying to jam things in a file folder. You get it halfway in, or you get it in the wrong file folder, or it's kind of bent. And so that's where the brain is trying to process this. And when we talk about re-experiencing as one of the primary post-traumatic stress symptoms, that I think is really the brain trying to process it on its own. And sometimes it doesn't. And for many people, that's kind of a normal response that then begins to fade over time. But in many cases, we get stuck and we need help in order to be able to allow the brain to process what it's experienced. So things like EMDR, things like prolonged exposure, CBT, there's all these different kinds of conventional approaches to post-traumatic stress that are all based on trying to help the brain process what it's experienced. So this is just one way of being able to give people an opportunity to begin that process. And so that's on the post-traumatic stress side of things. On the soul wound side of what we're doing, Nobody should have to see the things that we have to see, and nobody should have to do the things that we have to do, but we're sheepdogs. And, as long as there are wolves, there's going to be a need for sheepdogs, right? So, we are going to have people who serve in law enforcement and fire service and the military. And we're asking them to go into situations where they are required to see things and do things that no civilian is really going to be able to understand. So when we encounter the world in its broken form, when we look evil straight in the eye, when we see things that no person should inflict the kind of damage on another person that happens, and sometimes happens multiple times on a shift, where we see that, it opens up these question marks about who we are, about who God is, about what this world is all about. And if we don't wrestle with those and we don't come to some answers to those things, then we're just left with these gaping wounds that even if we address the traumatic stress part of it, we may not address what's really causing the main issue. And what we found is when you combine the two together is where sometimes people just really connect the dots, and it starts to hit home.
That's absolutely amazing. Andrea, when Scott was talking about that first week where people come in and open up about their stories, in your experience, do you see many, especially first responders, but certainly I would believe it would be in veterans as well, who are struggling with an imposter syndrome where they feel they should not have really, they don't feel they've seen as bad as other people have seen? It's something you frequently see, for example, with a veteran who wasn't deployed versus one who was, and the one who wasn't deployed seems to be almost very embarrassed about what he or she is dealing with. Do you see imposter syndrome much in that first week?
It does come up now and then. And I think the thing that Reboot is so great about is establishing that comfort, safe zone. And I say comfort because it is an uncomfortable situation that you're there for, but we have people that come and openly express that they were there because their spouse kind of says, hey, this is like an ultimatum or a last alternative, or they come here. It's kind of like one more source to try, but they're kind of dragging their feet. And some of them do express that they don't feel like worthy of it. And I think that is where I've seen, because of how the course is set up and we establish those boundaries, those safe boundaries, those good boundaries, kind of right off the bat, that people start to see that because we're all first responders in there or spouses of first responders, they have that kind of established trust to begin with. And that starts to open up. Some are quicker to open up than others, and some it takes some pulling teeth to get them rolling in, but rightfully so. This is their journey, is as vulnerable as anybody else's. Yet some have expressed that they don't feel like they've seen a major incident. It's been kind of all along through the years of those little things that have impacted them, and they just kind of realize it just hit them on the head at one point. So some of them do feel guilty that they haven't had a single traumatic incident. But like as Scott said, that's where we're all in together. It's that established community. And once we start breaking down those barriers of them, and we go through things like identity, and all the class starts talking with each other, and they see that they're kind of all in the same boat, regardless of what their experience or their journey. And it is that familiarity of somebody's been in similar shoes, and no, they might not have seen what I've seen, or I haven't seen what they've seen, but they feel the same feelings. And I think that is a powerful connection that ensures them or validates that, hey, they belong there and their story is just as valuable as the next person's, regardless of what that is.
Just to add on to that, I mean, we're just like Andrea said, we're straight up front. First week, no comparisons. Your situation is yours, mine is mine. We're here to help each other, but we're not going to play the one-upmanship or, oh, you think that was bad? Listen to we don't play that game. And as leaders, we cut that off at the knees if it were to happen. And we want to make sure that anybody feels welcome in a course, whether they're, a rookie just out of the academy and had their first bad call, whether it's somebody with 30 years of experience and retiring, whether it's a spouse, whether it's any agency. We really make a very deliberate effort to make sure that the people do feel welcome. If they came there, it's for a reason, and we want to help them on their particular journey in whatever way we can.
The fact that you cut it off at the knees is important.
We've had some people in one of my first classes I instructed, there was somebody in there who was fresh out of the academy and fresh on the force and had not gone through any traumatic incidences yet and felt that they didn't have any trauma stories to share. But that was okay. What that person got out of it and what they left with was tools for resiliency. They might not have had as many or even traumatic stories to tell, or their stories might have been in the beginning stages. But the thing is they learned from others, and their perspective was just as valuable as somebody who had gone through that incident. And that person who had gone through that incident was able to now inform somebody who might not have gone through it, in the fact of, hey, this is some heads up of what I wish I would have done differently in my healing journey, or just kind of that experience that they've been through was just as valuable to that person who hadn't had a major traumatic incident yet, but they're all in the same room because they all had the same mission of serving the others. And so it was kind of an interesting twist, because what that person walked out with were tools that set them up for their first traumatic incident, versus if they had not heard any of those stories and decided not to go in there because they didn't feel that they had any trauma to share.
I think I really and truly believe that. I mean, when you're a rook, you should be doing this training right from the start. I think that's our biggest problem. Quite honestly, as you speak in terms of, a lot of times it's spouses that lead them there, and they're kind of thinking, I don't really need this. There's not really a problem. I am that person. It was my wife who needed to talk to me to say, you need to talk to somebody. What do I need to talk to somebody about? Well, you're getting angry. Well, I've been angry all the time. Well, you weren't always that angry. You're not communicating very well with us. Well, because you guys are bugging me. You're annoying me. Well, but that's the other thing too, is we always seem to annoy you. There's so many things that go on that for sure the spouse ends up being a huge proponent for people to go. Now, I say that to come back full circle and go, well, the reason my spouse needed to have that conversation with me was because I never received any training or support whatsoever regarding my mental health or the traumas that I was going through. So there's I still to this day can't look back and go, yeah, I really missed something there. I see it as a very gradual decline in my mental health, that it was for me no particular one incident. It was a series of incidents that happened over a series of years, that the changes to me are small. They just exasperate and become a huge problem that for the person who's affected, who's diagnosed, it just doesn't seem like a problem. It seems to be that's the way I always was. I look back now though and go, yeah, I did not ever consume alcohol the way I started consuming after I became a cop. It wasn't even close. Did I enjoy sometimes? Sure. But that would be maybe a weekend, a month at best. And all of a sudden it came to, the last 2 years, my shift would end at 1,500 hours. And by 15:05, I had something poured up just to be able to cope. And that's a reality. So again, to go back to what you said, Andrea, I really believe people should be getting this right out of the academy. I love the fact that individual was there to listen to the old timers that had experienced the trauma, because that to me is not only going to give him an insight into the things for which he should be looking, but it also now very early in the game develops a set of resources for him where he has met Andrea Rider, where he has met Scott, where he has met other people that are in there. That is a huge proponent to be able to effectively mitigate future continuing issues with post-traumatic stress.
Hey, Larry, before you go on, I just want to say one more thing. When you're talking about the spouse, I could not agree more. And Andrea and I have seen this time and again, that the spouse is often the key. And they're often suffering themselves. We call it secondary stress. They are experiencing their own injuries from their husband or wife's service. So those need attention. That's part of why we're so deliberate about inviting the spouse to participate. But just to give you something practical that your listeners can use, nobody wants to bring home the blood and gore of what they've seen on a shift, and they don't need to. But what they do need to bring is the emotion. And that's, I think, a key differentiator that can really help a couple communicate is maybe I come home and I need 15, 20 minutes just to kind of be by myself. All right. Then when I'm ready to engage, all I've got to do is say, hey, I want to on a really bad call, bad car wreck, and I'm just feeling angry. I'm just feeling sad by what I saw. And, a lot of times guys in particular aren't comfortable talking with emotion words, but that's really what the spouse needs to know. They don't need to know all the gory details, but they need some kind of access to your heart with what is it that you're feeling. And if we can do that, it goes a long way to bridging those gaps.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's being missed. I mean, it really and truly is being missed. Could you speak a little bit about the different sessions that REBOOT has for military veterans, first responders? Could you tell us the difference between those?
If you went into all three of the courses, and there's three that we have primary courses, you're going to find a lot of commonalities. It's talking about the same kind of things. It's how we go about talking about them that's different. So in the combat recovery course, military terminology, talking about wartime experiences and relating as a combat veteran. So we also have in some of the videos that accompany the course material, we'll have combat veterans speaking. And then the course leaders are going to be combat veterans themselves or the spouses. They're obviously bringing their own perspectives to that. Same thing for the first responder course, same general topics that we're talking about week over week. They're just done in a different language and a different culture. What we realized in doing these two courses is that just about everybody needs this, especially in the post-COVID era. So many people have experienced all sorts of different kind of traumas in their life, whether it's childhood, emotional, physical, sexual abuse, things that happened as a teenager, being bullied or whatever, the difficulties of just life in general, natural disasters, car accidents, fires. I mean, the list goes on. That we really needed to do the general trauma program. So that's kind of the third version of the course that's not service track specific, but instead is available for anybody to be able to heal from traumas. Just in general, a lot of commonalities across three, a lot of commonalities about what they talk about. It's just how they talk about it that's different.
I mean, I think that's a big deal, even just the jargon you use between veterans and first responders. And again, we had spoken that there's a lot of similarities. However, there's differences as well. And I think that's actually a very healthy way to look at it, is instead of trying to throw everyone in the same room, you've actually got different things for first responders, for military veterans, and for people who have experienced trauma outside of one of those vocational areas. Andrea, where can people do the REBOOT program? Where is it available?
There's always course locations being added. So there are two aspects of it. There's some in person and there are some that are virtual. We kind of started the virtual option via COVID, and some just stayed with that option. And so you could go to REBOOTRecovery.com and you choose your specific, there would be a join a course tab, and you can choose your specific one if you want the combat recovery version, the first responders version, or just a generic trauma version. And then there it will have the locations listed, and it will indicate whether one is a virtual option as well. The cool thing about REBOOT is that just for the physical courses, it's in over 44 states and something like 11 countries. So it's worldwide as well, which I think is great, amazing, powerful that it has spread that far and that the awareness and the help is getting that far. But a lot of people don't have one in their area. So that's why I also think that online version is good for those people as well, because they're at least getting something. I would say the in-person courses, you get that face-to-face, that in the same room fellowship. But the amazing thing that we have found when we've also done the online version is that you're able to connect with other first responders all across the country. That's an amazing feeling that somebody across the coast could be going through the same thing as you. I mean, what a way to tell you that you're not alone in this journey. And it's somebody that you don't know at all, that's completely out of your community, could have different demographics from a small town to a big town, and you're all in the same, virtual room. So two great options there to go and look up locations.
Awesome.
If any of the listeners on this have been struck by what we're saying and would like to know more about leading a course in their community, we're all about reaching as many responders as we can. And we don't have currently a big presence in Canada. I think we have one course in Canada. That's got to change. I mean, there's just too many people that we need to reach. And in order to do that, we need people to step forward and say, yeah, train me how to lead on this course. And we've got all of the setup, we've got all the infrastructure, we've got all the supplies. We have a training program that's done virtually, so you don't have to go anywhere to learn how to lead a course. We got coaches who are experienced in leading to walk you alongside you the whole way. So we just need people to come forward and say, yeah, tell me more. So if anybody is interested, I'll just give you my email right on here. It's scott@rebootrecovery.com. Reach out to me and I'd be glad to tell you more.
I have a funny feeling you're going to get some emails.
I'm looking forward to it.
I really do, because, I mean, certainly, look, at the end of the day, each one of us right now on this podcast, and there's pretty good likelihood that pretty much everyone who's listening are struggling because of a choice we made a long time ago, and that choice was that we just wanted to help people. And ultimately, this is exactly what both of you are doing right now. You are helping people who are struggling. You are helping brothers and sisters that you have experienced their struggles. You understand, you can empathize. And we are right back to that reason we joined in the first place. And that is something that I personally feel had been lost for a number of years. And I've only just been feeling again over the last couple of months doing this. So Reboot is something that I truly believe needs to take place more in this country. So Scott's left you his email. If you, for some reason, didn't have a pen and you want to contact me, reach out. I would be more than happy to be the conduit that brings you in contact with Scott so that discussions can be had about getting you trained as a leader and getting Reboot offered to those who are struggling on this side of the border. Before we end off, we'll start with you, Andrea. This is your time. Is there anything else that you would like to add? Anything else you would like to say? This floor is yours.
Well, I just want to let anybody know who is going through a struggling journey, a healing journey, seeking for some kind of resolution or some kind of, sometimes we have people trying to grasp onto anything that they can because they've tried different approaches that just aren't working. And I want to say a couple of things. First of all, that there is hope after trauma. Like Scott said, it might not be the same as it was before, but there is hope. There is different ways that your path can be changed, perspective. And honestly, I think one of the big things is in our, like, a purpose in your pain section. And this is something I truly believe is I was put in that situation for a higher purpose. My purpose, I feel now, is to help other first responders. I volunteer with the veteran community as well. So helping those in service on a different level. I kind of did my duty helping out civilians, and now I feel my greater calling is to help out my brothers and sisters. And I feel I was put in that situation so that I could achieve that next thing. For me, that is my purpose in that pain. And I am glad that I had that, because the purpose that I have now is something I could have never imagined. And I just had to get there. There was that missing link in that journey that once I found that resource that I connected with that started my healing journey, it made all the difference in the world. And that's where I found, it's not like I didn't have hope after trauma, but you can see the light. You're kind of lost. Sometimes you might feel lost in this tunnel. And that connection started to help me see the light and helping me process that so that I could be on my path then just continued down the road and was a greater path than I could have ever imagined. So trauma isn't the end of your story. You're not broken. You're just wounded a little bit, and wounds can heal, like Scott had mentioned. I think the key thing is to find somebody or the resources that connect with you. Don't give up until you find something that connects with you. because a lot of times we're sent to, well, here in the United States, I don't know what's called in Canada, but we have a play-assisted program. That's kind of the thing through the Human Resources Department that they send you to. Well, that most of the time is not first responder specific. It's kind of their first step of that they have to obligatory send you to it. So a lot of people get discouraged at that point because they're like, I've poured my soul out, it hasn't worked. But that is not the connection that works for that person. And I've seen so many people, it is an exhausting journey sometimes. I will say that. But the thing is that if you're unable to find a resource that you connect with, the more you keep trying, hopefully you are closer to the one that does. And REBOOT Recovery is just one of those tools. We hope that that is a tool in your toolbox that can help you. It might be the thing that completely changes the trajectory for you. It might be just a small stepping stone, or it might be just a small ripple in your pool. But regardless of whether you utilize REBOOT Recovery or a different resource, you might not need just one resource. Like I said, it's tools in your toolbox, right? So I just want to encourage anybody out there to keep finding what works for you. If something doesn't work, please don't give up. And there are other people out there that are seeking their healing journey as well. And sometimes it just takes a connection with another person that is going through that while you are seeking a resource that could greatly help you. So my main point for anybody is it can be exhausting, but there is hope after trauma. And please keep persevering because you are not alone. There are a lot of us out there that are trying to reach you, and we want to reach you, and we want to help, and we would do anything we could. Sometimes there's limited resources, and that's unfortunate, but there are people that want to help you on your journey.
I just want to take a moment to thank you very much for helping our brothers and sisters. I really appreciate that. And it certainly just sounds from your tone that you are in a very good place right now, and it's fantastic to hear. Thank you very much, Andrea.
Thank you.
Scott, the floor is yours. Anything you want to add in?
Yeah, Larry, once again, just thanks for having us on. What I would want to have people hear is that, as Andrea said, post-traumatic stress injuries are normal. I mean, that is the normal way that we respond to things that are abnormal circumstances. What we don't want is to stay stuck in them. And that takes intentionality. That takes intentional steps to better your situation. And that can go a lot of different avenues like Andrea was talking about. And, REBOOT may be a part of your journey, maybe it's not. But there are a variety of different ways to take intentional steps that can lead to healing and post-traumatic growth. And so that's our wish for folks, is that they do find purpose, that they're able to transform that pain into new purpose in their life, and that they're incredible people. We know that because of the things that they do to serve our communities. They have so much potential for whatever might be next in their life. If we're a way to be able to help them bridge that gap from where they are to where they want to be, then that's what we're all about.
Thank you very much, Scott. I really appreciate it. And Andrea, again, thank you very much. For me to sort of sum up here, I just want to say that a little while ago, I was experiencing some problems. I was trying to do some editing on my laptop, and it just kept giving me issues. It kept locking up. It kept slowing down. It got to a point that it completely froze and would do nothing. And the way it was fixed was because I rebooted it. Think about that. Just think about that. That's the point. Sometimes it may seem like there's problems, but there is an opportunity to reboot. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen. I really appreciate Scott and Andrea joining again. My name is Larry Payton. I have your 6. Please also have mine.
Don't go away. There's so much left to do, so many things I wanna say, and I sing here. Don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it all away.